education entitled Propaganda. This is this audio from a movie called No Way Out, directed by Joe Mankiewicz in 1950. With Ray Widmark, everybody's favorite psycho, and Sidney Poitier. And anyway, speaking of propaganda, here we go, music up, the blubbering Ray Widmark. He's great, he's the greatest psycho in all movies, I think. I mean, you know, he's kind of low-key. He's not exactly, he doesn't well, sometimes he does overact. Well, now in his first movie, Kiss of Death, he portrayed a giggling psycho who really set the standard for all times to come. And I'm not alone in this observation either. According to the book Movies on TV and Video Cassette by Stephen Scheuer, if I got the title right, Kiss of Death, 3 stars, 1947. Victor Mature, Brian Dunleavy, Richard Widmark, Mildred Dunnock, Colleen Gray. Widmark made his remarkable debut as a giggling killer. How can you compete for attention with a grinning Widmark pushing crippled Dunnock down a flight of stairs so she won't squeal? It was remade into a very, very bad movie a couple of years ago. But the original, well, as much insofar as it was just a B movie, it was a magnificent piece. And you know, you can almost tell a B movie by the title. Kiss of Death, Touch of Evil. Some say Touch of Evil was the greatest B movie ever made. And that could be. But I also think that Kiss of Death is right up there. Now, No Way Out, I watched it in bits and pieces. It's one of those typical Hollywood morality play type things. Kind of crude. Not too bad. But, you know, let's see what our prescient Mr. Scheuer has to say about No Way Out. See, I ought to have me doing these movie introductions. Well, you know, quite frankly, this is not a really good movie, but Sidney Poitier makes his debut as a doctor who is afflicted by the taunts of a bigot. No, but really, it's a typical B movie. Although at one point Sidney, when eating, says, this stuff's so good, there ought to be a law against it. It gets to be a vicious habit, like drugs, which is really kind of odd. Gee, I don't even think No Way Out is even considered. Here we go. 3.5 stars. Richard Widmark, Linda Darnell, Sidney Poitier, feature debut. Biting drama about a Negro-hating, cop-hating hoodlum who incites a big race riot and almost ruins a Negro intern's chances of becoming a doctor. Director Joseph L. Mankiewicz gets top performances from his cast. He gives it a better rating than Kiss of Death, which I think is perhaps a little wrong-headed, but nevertheless, I mean, I'd rather watch Kiss of Death, quite frankly, with Ray Widmark making his feature debut as a giggling killer. And I also believe it was Victor Mature's first movie as well. Anyhow, speaking of propaganda, the concept of a military-industrial complex was grounded in the conflict of interest generated by a revolving door between contractors like Brown and Root, who were instrumental in getting Lyndon Johnson elected to the Senate, Pentagon officials, and supportive politicians, according to C. Eleanor Bader. And this citation is from Dollars and Cents from March-April 1997. A very fine publication, published in fact in Somerville, and you ought to try to get a hold of it. Now from Harper's, also from March of '97, free of ideological cant and capable of keeping straight the different tenses and declensions of time, Howard Devoto, in his series of articles entitled The Easy Chair, published in Harper's from 1935 to 1955, addressed his remarks to a literate society that constructed its thought with words instead of images, didn't mince his words and wore his convictions on his sleeve. By nature contrarian, he undertook the writing of The Easy Chair in the spirit of dissent and as a matter of civic obligation. The American democracy he understood as an idea in motion and a set of principles constantly in need of further experiment and revision, a relentless questioning of whatever temporary wisdom chanced to have been elected to political or literary office. His many tones of voice, sardonic, whimsical, poetic, angry, puckish, romantic, mocking, philosophical, he never tired of emptying the slops of ridicule on the heads of imbecile novelists and crooked politicians, according to Lewis Lapham. And as a matter of fact, I suppose if I ever do my master's thesis in history, I might jolly well do it as a commentary on the compilation of these articles, but I'll have to find a library where I can photocopy it free of charge, because microfilm is a drag, to say the least. Now, and you know, spending all that time on the microfilm machine gets to be rather wearisome after a while. I'd rather photocopy the hard copy. Anyhow, there's more about Devoto, but I will not bore you because it doesn't really directly have any bearing upon our theme, which is propaganda. Now, in the Atlantic from March of '97, I suppose one useful way of discussing propaganda is to define it by what it is not. Gibbon's Decline and Fall instructs that human nature never changes and that mankind's predilection for faction, augmented by environmental and cultural differences, is what determines history. In this, Gibbon was influenced by the Baron de Montesquieu, who saw history not as mere politics and ideas, but as a complex of cultural, social, and climatic forces. The brilliance of the Decline and Fall lies in Gibbon's ability to build a narrative out of individual agency and the surprises of history. Only patterns rather than individuals endure at the end of the 3 volumes covering 100 AD to AD 476. Gibbon's certainty that the tendency towards strife is a natural consequence of the human condition, a natural consequence of the very variety of our racial, cultural, and economic experience, which no belief system, religious or otherwise, can overcome, is reminiscent of Madison in The Federalist, convinced that a state or an empire can endure only if it generally limits itself to adjudicating disputes among its peoples, and in so doing becomes an exemplar of patriotic virtue. This is Robert D. Kaplan. Now, in other words, it's difficult for the United States, say, an imperial empire, to adjudicate the world's squabbles when, in fact, it is rapidly becoming more and more tribalistic and fragmented within its own polity. So, and that's just the dilemma that Lyndon Johnson faced with waging the Vietnam War, an enormously wasteful and stressful war, and at the same time attempting to eliminate poverty and promote civil rights. Of course, the center cannot hold, mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. I sound like Oliver Stone quoting from Yeats in the outtakes from the movie Nixon. By the way, Nixon's a pretty good movie, and you ought to check it out if you happen to have an extra $3.50 and happen to be in the video parlor and are sick of watching, you know, the for the umpteenth time, Eddie Murphy in some god-awful movie. You might want to check out Oliver Stone's Nixon, but don't turn the VCR off at the end of the film, because there are a series of very amusing and instructive outtakes, and the very last of these outtakes is perhaps the most chilling. And in it, Anthony Hopkins gives perhaps one of the most bravura performances I have ever seen an actor give. But of course, my opinion means less than nothing, even though in high school I was the film critic for the school newspaper. And I still have an interest in film as narrative. Ah, yes, they don't make them like they used to. Movies are better than ever. But we know when they're stupid in a new way, which is so stupid that it shades on brilliance. And when they're good in a way that I don't think people in the 40s and 50s could have contemplated. Like this movie I just saw, No Way Out, 1950. It seems as though every third minute there was the sound of sirens, and the sirens sounded so cheap and tinny, like they were obviously off-stage sound effects. It's almost like watching a radio show with pictures. Like the whole thing could have been done on the radio with very little in the way of, outside commentary. Like everything was like spelled out. I don't know how many times the doctor portrayed by Sidney Poitier had to say, "Oh, I think maybe it was a brain tumor." You know, just in case some of the slower members of the audience didn't quite catch what he had to say the first time. Anyway, a man like David Gergen, unafraid to admit that his loyalties and convictions are no more than outerwear, is always welcome at the table, says Michael Kelly in the Columbia Journalism Review. Bill Clinton was perceptive enough to master politics, but not perceptive enough to see what politics was doing to him, says the interesting Michael Kelly, also in this case quoted by Mike Hoyt in the Columbia Journalism Review of March, April 97. Our chief executive has become our national punching bag, as easy to hit as a blimp and just about as threatening in terms of power to return journalistic fire. What will Bill Clinton do when he retires? Michael Kelly says, eat. The Weekly World News says, screw. This is odd. I hope that the VCR hasn't just turned itself on. I hope it is in fact exactly 1 o'clock. Yeah, it's 1 o'clock. Okay, I'm going to sing a song for you now. Who knows how I love you? In this way, nobody but you. I do mean you, child. Hey, hey, every day now, hey, hey. That's an old Animals song. So, what Mickey Mouse did to me was represent something. In this case, meaningless shit on the news, the way they fill our minds with all this stuff to distract us from the real tragedy. He's a symbolic figure, says George Carlin, joining a long line of Mickey Mouse bashers. An honorable tradition. Bill Clinton, by the way, in Columbia Journalism Review, says, the people don't get it that the press runs the government. They love to destroy people. That's how they get their rocks off. The worst thing to do is to show up a reporter in front of his colleagues. They don't need you to say, what a dumb question. They know it's dumb. You just answer it. The profitability of newspapers depends on an economic formula that is ethically bankrupt. Duh! If you believe that culture is also news, consolidation of power affects the whole air we breathe. Yes, indeed. An interesting point. One that's been made many times. Bill's a good bullshitter, according to Mother Jones, March, April 97. America likes a good bullshitter. That's one of the reasons he was reelected. Honesty has no place in politics. It would throw everything off, says George Carlin. What moron said that knowledge is power? Knowledge is power only if it doesn't depress you so much that it leaves you in a mobile heap at the end of your bed, says Paula Poundstone. In Las Vegas, I don't use the word Republican, though I say a lot about conservatives. There's something about the word conservative that gives people a little more freedom to join you if they like editing. It's accommodating the reality of the world. I'm not quite sure what relevance that has to anything. George Carlin said it. Well, anyway, a big issue nowadays is, well, there are two big issues, domestic-wise. Actually, there are many big issues, but the ones that the press have recently been concerning themselves, most recently, as a matter of fact, have been welfare reform and the problem of employing the otherwise unemployable. And that seems to be on the agenda right about now. And a few months ago, on the agenda was criminals, the punishment of criminals. And in the American Prospect of March, April 1997, Michael Kazin has a lengthy article in which he first cites Timothy McVeigh, who wrote to the Lockport newspaper letters to the editor section. And by the way, Lockport is a little town in upstate New York, a little less than 30 miles away from Niagara Falls. And strangely enough, I've actually seen Lockport, and it's a little grease pit of a town, basically just a concrete warren in the middle of nowhere. The sort of place where you grow up in just to get away from, if you get my drift. I mean, you know, when your idea of excitement is going to Buffalo for a weekend, then you know that it's a kind of depressing little place. In any event, criminals have no fear of punishment. Taxes are a joke. More taxes are always the answer to government mismanagement. Politicians are out of control. Their yearly salaries are more than an average person will see in a lifetime. The American dream of the middle class has all but disappeared, substituted with people struggling just to buy next week's groceries. Well, he has a point there. Hofstadter traced this pseudo-conservatism to the rootlessness and heterogeneity of American life, and above all, to its peculiar scramble for status and its peculiar search for identity. Among militia members, belief in what McCarthy called a conspiracy so immense against American liberties remains as vibrant as ever. William Pierce, in the Turner Diaries, stated, "Our enemies can't imagine why anyone would want to go back to the bad old days when this was a white country, and men were men and women were women, and the freak stayed in the closet, and everyone worked for his living." So, anyway, it seems as though somehow this is, in fact, appropriately referred to as propaganda. And just to remind you, hi, I'm the Wrong Hero, and you are tuned to this week's presentation, part 15 in our ongoing series on politics, entitled Propaganda. Now, you might be wondering, what are you getting at exactly with this? Well, this is a series of lectures I hope someday to give once I get my degree in history, and then, you know, I'll have this ready-made series of lectures that I can condense down. Because, you know, by the time I get my degree, 1996 will be ancient history. And I can give this incredibly lengthy speech replete with all of my citations, which I should have put in numeric order, right? I mean, that would have made it a little more scientific, or at least scholarly. But, you know, the thing is, I don't need to put it in numeric order. I mean, I know what I said, and I put little check marks next to them, so I'll be able to find them again. The Ku Klux Klan, Father Coughlin, John Birch. Conservatives were there all along, asserting their alternative grievances and philosophies and limiting what liberals could accomplish. Both aspects of the white male radical, the grassroots Democrat and the racist vigilante, originated in that most American of desires, the pursuit of an individual gain free from interference and restraint. Mass violence furthered their immediate self-interest as well as fueling a larger vision of social justice. I'm not sure I'd exactly refer to it as a vision, but there you have it. More like a set of blinders on which to conceal a vision of what's really going on. The militia's deep distrust of the constitutional order echoes the fiercely anti-authoritarian spirit that crested during the 1960s and shows little sign of ebbing. In other words, it's sort of like the flip side of the hippies, right? They share a rejection of agencies, laws, and court rulings that demand citizens surrender their most cherished rights to the state. The Black Panthers and the Patriot War lovers both saw themselves as well-armed guerrillas defending their communities against implacably external aggression. Mistrust of the state and the defense of traditional values have defined the political discourse for some time now. Well, in recent news, 400,000 chicks in Northern Ireland were killed to prevent the spread of Newcastle disease, a viral fowl pest, according to the Spectator of February 22nd. Nah, leave it out, my son. Do me a favor. You looking at me, John? I just had to say that. I don't know why. Nah, leave it out, my son. Do me a favor. You looking at me, John? I'm getting in my Irish mode here. Nah, leave it at me, son. Do me a favor. You're looking at me, John? Why is it okay to make fun of Irish people? I don't know. Because they don't mind. Well, they do mind, but not so much. A pollster, they tend today to perform the new Brahmin-cased Pollsters tend today to form the new Brahmin-cased cast of politics. It's a good thing that Abraham Lincoln didn't have to conduct the Civil War by polls. Dick Morris, depicting the politician he has served on and off for nearly 20 years is little better than a manipulated, insecure doughboy. Well, for some, slacking represents a strategic career move. Many of my friends work dead-end jobs to pay rent, all the while angling for the big score. By choosing work that doesn't consume them, they save energy to serve the only boss they really trust, themselves. Even if you fail, at least you haven't sold your youth to some corporate juggernaut. Most slacking involves underemployment, in which people work jobs well below their education capabilities. Some do this because they have no choice. The jobs they want simply aren't available. Others slack because they've lost faith in the rat race. What seems like apathetic hedonism actually represents a fairly informed bet. Why put up with the cubicle world's woes when its promised delayed gratification is an ever more dicey proposition, according to American Demographics magazine of March 1997. Great. That means that all the vicious and unscrupulous people get all the good jobs, where all the scrupulous and conscientious people relegate themselves to a dead-end life because of their scruples. The best lack all conviction, and the worst are full of a passionate intensity. Hooray! Oh, is there any man who can quote that entire poem, seriatim? They always just pick out that one thing. Things fall apart, the sender cannot hold. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. That's what all I remember. Well, anyhow, what does the future hold for us? The year 2005, electromagnetic pulse terrorism. The year 2007, plague wars. The year 2050, DNA experimentation run amok, nanotech nightmare, bacteria-sized omnivorous robots. Year 2045, man on Mars. Year 2967. Robot probe from Earth intercepted by sentient aliens. Year 3001. Human race wiped out by inept handling of alien technology. Year 25 billion. Black hole consumes galaxy. That's okay, we won't be around, will we? Well, here's something interesting. Before going to Disneyland, Brazilians are sent a 10-minute etiquette tape, which is so irritating as to be an incitement to vandalize. Kids are told how to stand in line, bathe without flooding bathrooms, and put litter in proper trash cans. The high point is when the narrator suggests that children refrain from screaming when they're having fun. Well, that's awfully nice. Hell, you work for Bill Clinton, you go up and down more times than a whore's nightgown, says James Carville, cited by Rush Limbaugh in the Limbaugh letter of December 1996. If you believe there will be real campaign reform in the next Congress, you'll believe that rocks grow, said Dan Rather on election night. Well, Trent Lott is preventing Senator Thompson from investigating the biggest scandal of all, which is what is totally legal. Well, talking about your propaganda, in the 1960s, life seemed more vivid in those days. The colors were day glow. The music was inspired. The drugs were mind-blowing. The politics were intense. Everything seemed to matter, and the pace was very, very fast. Two separate strands of behavior seemed to wind through the 60s. One of them was violent, the other benign, but they were twisted together like a double helix. For some people, they seemed to point toward nothing less than a transformation of American life. And so the language of those days tended to the millennial. Giddy academics wrote of the birth of a new consciousness. Young rebels plotted revolution. What had the 60s left behind? A continuing suspicion of government, though now it comes more from the right than from the left. Yes, yesterday's hippies are today's libertarians, and the revolutionary weathermen seemed to have joined militias. In the Navy, there's something called the heat transfer theory, which holds that if the heat is on your friends, you don't want to get too close, lest you be burned. And it's very true. That's why people won't stick their oars in to defend you. They instinctively realize this. The iron law of American electoral politics, third parties never go anywhere, has a corollary. The ideology of a third party, if it fulfills a need, will be taken over by Democrats, populists, the Republicans, or both, progressives. Libertarians may be reaching this stage, says Chris Clausen in the New Leader of February 10th, 1997. Now, the New Leader is a pretty good magazine, but it never seems to never seems to come on time. You know what I'm saying? It always seems to be at least a month behind schedule. I mean, you could understand if it were published in England. Say, I have a plaque on my building that says, Bill Clinton never slept here. Ha 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 ha. So, Yes, the political citations are getting mighty thin on the ground. Let's see. It takes about, November, December, January, February, March. It takes about 5 months for the media to stop commentating and giving postmortems on the presidential election. After which there is a gap, and eventually they find something else to focus on, even if it's, as a last resort, substantive commentary on pressing problems that the country is facing. However, that generally happens in the doldrum months of June, July, and especially August. Well, in the New Republic of March 24th, and of course their bread and butter is commenting on politics, we think the spectacle of every mother's money-grubbing son on Capitol Hill becoming an overnight common causer is pretty unbecoming too. Virtue is square. Coolness hints at impropriety. Well, you know, that sheep wasn't really cloned from a single cell, but a nuclear DNA clone. See, just when the aftermath of the election was beginning to die down, that sheep cloning came up. And of course, all of the media immediately started making dumb jokes. As Coleridge said, on the 3rd of December in 1801, cited by Alexander Cockburn in A Nation piece published March 24th, 1997, men who possess a few secret anecdotes of men in power should never wish to affix to them an importance they do not possess, or pass them off for anything more than they really are. In short, we look at the weathercock to be informed which way the wind blows, not to discover how it happened to blow that way. That's one way to become very popular, by the way, is to accumulate a bunch of anecdotes in an interesting field. What's in and what's out? Well, in swinging Los Angeles, among males, ska, Star Wars, Nintendo 64, drugs, and sex swingers. Among females, candles, drugs, hip-hop, computers, goth, punk, and athletic appearance. Whereas in San Francisco, among males, it's heroin, used clothing, Ben Davis, retro, East Coast hip-hop, and reggae. Whereas among females, it's hippies, East Coast hip-hop, rockabilly, makeup, Michael Jordan, and Nikes. In Seattle, among males, it's retro styles, kung fu, crazy dye jobs, indie movies, vodka, and Marilyn Manson. Whereas among females, it's the 50s, the 80s, short haircuts, acid jazz, suits, and tongue piercing. In Austin, Dallas, among males, what's in is crafty art, clubs, heroin, retro, environmental activism, and old school. Whereas among females, what's in is homosexuals, drugs, retro clothing, lowriders, Nike Air Max, and vinyl. In Chicago, among males, what's in is raves, key casual clothes, boots, jungle music, and drugs. Whereas among females in Chicago, it's coffee shops, raves, modern culture, rock climbing, tag watches, and bootleg pants. But in New York City, and presumably among the hipper enclaves in Boston, What's in among males is jungle, designer clothing, bright colors, metal, aliens, and North Face jackets, whereas among females it's old body clothing, ski look, yellow, leather, Nautica, and designer clothes. Well, how interesting. And among locations which are in, according to the New Yorker, New York, Summit, Colorado, Japan, and Liverpool. And locations which are out are Dallas, Stratton, Vermont, and Los Angeles. Dallas is unkindly characterized as being 6 to 8 months behind. So that's nice. Good to know. Of course, these summations are at least 6 to 8 months behind themselves, since they come from the New Yorker of March 17th, and today, by the time you watch this, it will be late August, so there you have it. It's difficult to be cutting edge. Time moves so fast. Like anybody really cares what the latest fad is anyway. See, it's all propaganda. People become so obsessed with keeping up with the latest trend, they don't have time to actually sit down and think about things that might possibly be more important and affect their lives in the years to come. No, instead it's all fixation upon things which, by their very nature, will become outmoded before too long. By the way, if you buy a box of rice checks, you can get a free CD-ROM. Now, if you get this CD-ROM, my advice to you is don't take it out of the package. Keep it in its seal. Hang on to it for 20 years. You'll be able to sell it at a garage sale or something, or more likely, at a dealer's convention for $200. It'll have cost you exactly 50 cents if you get a triple coupon and purchase the cereal with it, since rice checks are on sale. A word to the wise. Well, according to the American Spectator of April 1997, quoting Thomas Merton, which is fortunate because, in fact, it's quoting Thomas Merton in precisely the same way that Jonathan Katz quotes Thomas Merton in his book, Virtuous Reality. It sometimes happens that men who preach most vehemently about evil and the punishment of evil, so that they seem to have practically nothing else on their minds except sin, are really unconscious haters of other men. They think the world does not appreciate them, and that is their way of getting even. In the British press, Bill Clinton is rumored to be both a regular coke snorter and a serial pants dropper, which is nice to know. Shorta Magora. Most Americans now get their news from entertainers, and entertainers, above all, need to be loved. The new news entertainers need to be loved by their subjects. TV news is not news at all. It's a press release that a duty editor entered in the diary. That's what almost all network news is. If they could record it a month in advance, they would. The same flabby, generalized health, lifestyle, and human interest features that no genuine news program would touch. The National Enquirer stuck doggedly to pertinent matters, hard specifics that require journalists getting their shoes a little muddy. That's too much like hard work for the uptown boys. It's much easier to convert the story to symbolism. The entire mainstream media, and I'm quoting at length from Mark Stein, the entire mainstream media is singing a wretched song of impenetrability. There is a serious scandal going on in the American press, and it's nothing to do with British tabloids. Laziness, bias, and above all, the increasing remoteness of the media from anything approaching real American life have corrupted the entire political discourse. What does the wholesale inaccuracy of American polling mean? That the entire news-gathering operation is now so infected that it's second nature? In the Soviet Union, the state spent a fortune jamming signals, smashing printing presses, seizing books, trying to keep its populace in total ignorance of everything. America, to a degree the KGB would marvel at, has almost achieved this goal, though the sheer dozy complacency of its respectable press. Give me the Fleet Street Velociraptors any day, says Mark Stein, who I believe is himself a British subject. Hence his bias. According to Dick Morris, campaign consultants are America's highest paid migrant workers. According to the American Spectator, Ben Stein, abortion is equivalent to slavery. According to Dick Morris, according to Vic Gold, Lee Atwater was a rebel, the product of a South Carolina political culture that features campaigning as a form of guerrilla entertainment. Well, and here's something interesting. One World Wide Web site alleges that the blue M&Ms murdered the tan ones. Just how serious can that be, however? I believe you should live every day as if it's your last, which is why I don't have any clean laundry. According to a little sidebar called This England in the New Statesman and Society. Worthing United footballer Dave Clark, 34, has been banned from playing for his non-league team after he nailed a pig's head to the opposite team's dugout before the game. Dave said it was just part of a long-running joke. According to Alexander Cockburn, Bill Clinton is in some fashion linked to Scientology. Of course, he doesn't say this in The Nation, he says it in the New Statesman and Society, which most Americans don't read. Bill Clinton's style, according to Lisa Jardine, is consciously directed to the politically disenchanted, just like Ross Perot. Well, as long as we're on the subject of propaganda, let's talk about propaganda in one of its more subtle forms, satire. According to Miles Kingston, also cited from the New Statesman, satire is meant to change society. Satire is meant to make people recognize the error of their ways. Satire is meant to cure ills. Unfortunately, there is not a single case on record of satire ever having achieved this. All satirists are complete failures. They don't make converts of anyone who isn't a convert already. People don't give a shit about what Hogarth thought. What they liked was the sheer observation of everyday life, and the street scenery, and the people, and the pretense, and the reality which made them laugh. They liked the energy and the way his scenes teemed with life, and they liked the way people were drunk in the street and seduced each other. Outside the theater, Hogarth's pictures were the nearest anyone had got to soap opera, a treasure house of contemporary references. Hogarth liked to cram as much into etching as possible, like a film sequence with loads of extras all trying to steal the scene. And so, unlike propaganda, satire doesn't really have the kind of weightiness, the kind of power to actually influence people other than the converted that propaganda, when successful, presumably does. Well, these embarrassing lapses are specifically designed to give you a chance to think about what I've just been saying. Either that or they are a sign of my utter incompetence. Well, now here's something very interesting that was cited in Newsweek of March 24th by Elaine Showalter, cited by Jonathan Alter. Like most conspiracy theorists, Pierre Salinger exaggerates honest doubt into evidence of wrongdoing. According to Elaine Showalter, people have come to think there are magic bullet answers to the complexities of modern life. In place of socialism versus capitalism, it's conspiratorial versus non-conspiratorial. People who think most bad things can be explained by bad people working together in brilliant secrecy, versus people who think the natural human condition is to talk too much. Call it conspiracism, a religion that blends faith and doubt, a comfortable way to make sense of a messy world. One-stop shopping for every explanation. Pointing the finger is easier to live with than complexity. The skeptic as true believer, the cover-up as all-purpose Satan. It's good for self-esteem, too. Makes you seem hard-headed, savvy, skeptical. Journalists tend to be agnostics, suspicious enough to think the worst, but too familiar with chaos to subscribe automatically to conspiracy theories. The U.S. government has replaced Masons, Catholics, Jews, and Communists as the scapegoat of choice. "15 states now require life imprisonment for certain nonviolent marijuana offenses. In Montana, life imprisonment can be imposed for growing a single plant or selling a single joint," says Eric Schlosser in The Atlantic of April 1997. You may want to have a look at The Atlantic of April 1997, since it has a rather lengthy article on a subject which is, I'm sure, dear to the hearts of many of my listeners, insofar as I have any. And that is marijuana and its outlaw status in the polity. Why is marijuana outlawed? Good question. Since you will find many doctors who will say that it is far less harmful than alcohol. Even the ones in the boondocks will say that. It's not like some big city slicker doctor with his own pro-marijuana, pro-secular humanism agenda is out there saying that. So anyway, I don't hold with giving doctors unlimited power or treating them like oracular guides to all things on earth, but we should listen to our doctors when it comes dangerous and not so dangerous drugs. Again, citing from Eric Schlosser's article, the attack on marijuana has, in reality, been a cultural war, a moral crusade in defense of traditional American values. The laws now used to fight marijuana are now causing far more harm to those values than the drug itself. Mandatory minimum sentences prompted by Len Bias and his death shortly before a congressional election on June 19, 1986. The drug control bill was drafted while many academics and government officials were away on vacation. There was no input from federal judges, prison authorities, or drug abuse experts. According to Stephen B. Duke, Yale law professor, in some cases a house can be seized if it contains books on marijuana cultivation. That's called the drug exception to the Constitution. For future laws, forfeiture laws reward confidential informers with up to 25% of the assets seized as a result of their testimony. America's prisons are full of poor and working class marijuana offenders. Children of the middle class are rarely sent to prison. Their parents usually enroll them in private drug treatment programs. Some marijuana is currently worth more per ounce than gold. Well, gold, of course, has been taking a tumble. I think gold is now at something like $300 an ounce. If you had invested in gold in 1982, you would have actually lost money on that investment. If you had invested $1,000 in gold in 1982, that gold would now be worth, something like $982 or something, slightly less than what you paid for it, meaning you got absolutely no rate of return whatsoever on your investment. Whereas if you had bought an ounce of marijuana in 1982 and freeze-dried it, that $1,000 worth of marijuana would probably be sold now on the open market for, 3 to 4 times what you paid for it, depending on what it was. A distinct culture has evolved around marijuana, one championed by proud outcasts. The laws aimed at that culture have only perpetuated it, enshrining the cannabis leaf as a symbol of adolescent protest. In Ohio, marijuana cultivation for personal use was decriminalized in July of 1996. Possession of up to 3 ounces is a $100 misdemeanor. I'll tell you, I always thought Ohio was kind of weird. And so, these citations are all from the Atlantic of April 1997. Now here's something interesting. B natural, alarm clock. B flat, the hum of the refrigerator. The key of E, microwave. B flat up 1 full octave. The ding of the microwave. Key of A, tea kettle. Key of F, subway whine. Key of C sharp, office elevator bleep. Key of C, security system. When modes of music change, the fundamental laws of the state always change with them, says Socrates. Also cited in Thomas Pynchon's book, Mason and Dixon, as I seem to recall. Well, anyhow, post-Willie Horton, politicians quickly realized that acting tough towards crooks was a vote winner. It used to be that a person was soft on communism and therefore not worthy of election to high office. Now, of course, he's soft on crime and therefore not worthy of election to high office. If you don't go to a cockpit, you don't get the votes, according to Filipino Congressman Amado Bagatsing, who owns 200 fighting cocks. A little bit of trivia there. Sort of like not going to fundraising barbecues. Huh. This is so weird. The top men of the radical religious nationalist movements in the Middle East are usually more pragmatic than their followers, whose devotion to the cause tends to be untempered by political realism. Often the leaders find it prudent to restrain the crowd, but not always, and sometimes they do not even try, according to The Economist of March 15th. Yes, here it is, late August, and we're still citing from journals published in March. However, we are getting to the end of April, and pretty soon we'll be starting to catch up with more current events, which will be a thing called good. I want you to know, by the way, as long as we're near the midway point, that next week we will be showing a program which didn't get shown at the beginning of July, and so will be repeated, although it was never shown in the first place. So we'll be sort of breaking the sequence to a certain degree. However, 2 weeks from this show, we will be back on the track with a new presentation. Next week, in other words, we will be presenting Insider Out, which is really going to be about the very vortex or epicenter of the 1996 election. And then in 2 weeks we'll be broadcasting a program called Slick, which will be a continuation of themes explored in this week's presentation, Propaganda, and will concern itself with spin and spin doctors and the spin which the leaders, or let us say the powers that be, since what they exercise is not so much leadership as consensus guessing, is going to be our next presentation. Yeah, that's the exercise bike. Not very comfortable, but then again, it's not set to my comfort. Geez, I can't get this thing to reset itself. Now it's going to look like I've been monkeying with it, which in fact I have. There we go. So, in the weeks to come, on September 9th, we'll be presenting Slick. On September 16th, Dysphoria. On September 23rd, PAP. On September 30th, Opinion Only. December 7th, our presentation will be Spinning. October 14th, Snowball's Chance in Hell. Let's see, what's going on here anyway? October 21st, Lip Service. And we don't have any programming planned yet for October 28th, but I will be telling you what the title will be just as soon as I get around to it. So I have things pretty jolly well blocked off for the next few months. And that is as it should be. So, to continue with our presentation of propaganda, I know you're hanging on every word. The hyperbole, no, the hysteria. which has overtaken the opining class, according to the New Republic of March 31st. A campaign financing process that puts our elected officials supinely hostage to the big rich. George Magazine, the ultimate combination of dumb and offensive, the reductio ad absurdum of its amoral view of politics as show business. Gee, that's not a very nice thing to say, but might have a bit of truth to it. Here's how they do opposition campaigning in Albania. Berisha, go away. You are crazy. People will win against you. Well, that will certainly encourage him. Here are some political euphemisms which, in a sense, also contribute to the public's prevailing viewpoint as politicians as being little more than loudmouth opportunists eager to spread propaganda. Out of the loop, according to George Bush. Mistakes were made, Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton. Arcane, defense issues. Held accountable, offense. Overconfident and in some ways naive, Newt Gingrich. These things reflect on everybody else in the campaign, Bill Clinton. My actions did not reflect creditably, Newt Gingrich. My position was based on facts that were not complete, Richard Nixon. I am disappointed that it happened. It was clearly inappropriate, Bill Clinton. In the long run, whatever the outcome, the results will be a more stable form of government, Richard Nixon. The American people ought to feel good about me, Bill Clinton. I was and am in love with this country, Newt Gingrich. Let us get on with the people's business, says Newt Gingrich. All of these are citations by Daniel Shore in The New Leader of February 24th. Get suspicious when you hear the passive voice. Get suspicious about politicians suddenly moved by patriotism. Get suspicious about politicians too busy to look up the law. Get fluent in the euphemisms of scandal speak, urges Daniel Shore. Well, I guess I'm about halfway through this presentation of propaganda. We'll be taking a break, but we will return. Critics worry that health and safety standards in prison workplaces are not adequately enforced. Inmates cannot organize, collectively bargain, or obtain concessions from their employer, who is also their imprisoner. And some folks say that slavery was abolished. Not according to In These Times of March 17th. If you're looking on the newsstand for In These Times, it will be publishing an issue in the last issue that it'll publish until late September will be in mid-August. So go to the newsstand right now and you'll find it, but there'll be a 1-month-long hiatus. I announce this as a public service to those of you who faithfully follow In These Times. The prison industry can grow in bad times as well as good because the crime rate goes up during recessions, and that means jail population goes up as well. Well, so I guess I'm running out of things to say here. Not really. think of when it's a good point to break off. Howard Stern is unembarrassable, which is a great gift in American political life. Says Eric Alterman. Professional media scold. The entire history of television is essentially the history of just 10 shows. I Love Lucy, Gunsmoke, Bonanza, Laugh-In, All in the Family, Happy Days, Dallas Cosby, Roseanne, and Seinfeld. A perfectly patterned sequence. Comedy, mythology, comedy, satire. Comedy, mythology, comedy, satire. After 5 or 6 years, the system becomes overloaded with second-tier effects. The good is indeed the enemy of the great. New successes are the reverse image. Frivolous, not portentous. Enthusiastic, not sardonic. Cuddly, not sultry. Every episode of stardom thus carries within it the seeds of its own negation. After all, what would an iron law be without a dialectic? The star has his moment, and then later on, the rest of the world has their star moment. This is a very lengthy but highly interesting article in the New Yorker of March 24th about stardom, in which Louis Menand discusses at length how long stardom extends. Stardom cannot extend for a period greater than 3 years. No star has successfully done it 3 times. The Beatles have, but they were 4 stars. New successes are the reverse image of old successes. Enthusiastic where the old ones were sardonic, cuddly where they were sultry. Stardom means, if you are the star, that nothing you can do can be asymmetrical with what people want because you are what people want. Stardom is the intersection of personality with history, a perfect congruence of the way the world happens to be and the way the star is. Stardom is what makes people stars, but though stars may shine together, stardom always fades. It's the difference between being recognized in restaurants and being talked about in restaurants. It's the difference between being in evidence and being inevitable. Travolta is now back, but as a goofy impersonator of the Travolta of 1977 to 80, which was what we want him to be. Travolta is enjoying stardom by virtue of being the person who was John Travolta, as Elvis enjoyed stardom again in the last 3 years of his life, 1974 to 77, by virtue of being the person who had been Elvis Presley. Reality turns over completely every 9 years. It does so, however, in 3-year phases, such that the middle 3 years seem consistent with the time spirit of the first 3, and the last 3 years seem consistent with the time spirit of the second 3, but by the end entirely distinct from the first 3. Motion away from one phase is simultaneously motion toward another. If time is a staircase, reality is a slinky. By 1970, the time spirit of 1960 had been fully realized by becoming fully inverted. Television is actually the flywheel of continuity. It's what stitches the segments together. Saul Bellows' moment of getting it right, 1956, and then there was everyone else's moment of getting Saul Bellow, 1975 to 1980. Just so you know. Things can grip the general attention for only so long. And in fact, it is time for me to say so long to you. According to Terence Wrong of ABC News in Harper's of April 1997, as consumers of war, as bystanders to it, correspondents necessarily exploit war to write a piece of copy or make a broadcast. But if they get an adrenaline rush from having a narrow escape or a close brush with death, most have the decency to stay focused on the real victims of the conflict and not on their own stimulation. But The whole point of being there for Anderson was not the story but the thrill. He writes with the reckless self-absorption of a Russian roulette player who enjoys pulling the trigger and finding the chamber empty. Well, this will end part one of our presentation, but let me finish this quote. War can be terribly exciting. It calls on our deep inner reserves and forces us to face the limits of our own courage and in some cases the depths of our cowardice. But for real war correspondents, the blood and guts of it all eventually become too much. The excitement gives way to a sick feeling in the pit of your stomach at night as the scenes come rushing back. It breeds humility and gratitude to be alive, and often pledges never to go near a war zone again. War is for the young and foolish. So we'll be back with more of propaganda before too very long. I am the wrong hero. I thank you very much for tuning in. Please stay tuned for part two of our presentation coming right up.